Okay, we're learning the Gemara, Daf Yud Aleph Amud Aleph 11a. Let's bring up the text. We're learning the Gemara Megillah. Hold on. Okay, so we're in the middle of talking about kind of how people were approaching the Megillah, different Chachamim in their times, different Pesukim that they would quote. And also, we're kind of going to start going into the actual story itself to describe who Achashverosh was and what was his times and what was his ideas. So the Gemara starts like this. The Megillah starts off, chapter 1 of Esther, opens up verse 1, Vayihi b'mei Achashverosh, and it was in the days of Achashverosh and came to pass, which we said before is usually whenever it says Vayihi b'mei came to pass in the days, is a sign for something negative. So therefore, Rav continues along those notes and he says, from the word vayihi, we have the idea of vaivihi, which are words of woe and mourning. Because again, the story of Haman, obviously, the story of Esther brings the story of Haman, which is the desire to destroy the Jewish people. Hadad Chsiv, and based on this is the verse in Devarim that says, V'hismakartem sham laivecha, when you're going to go to exile. One of the curses that it says in Devarim that you're going to be sold there to your enemies, lavodim l'shvachais, as servants and maidservants. And the pasuk continues, says V'gomer, but the pasuk continues, and no man shall buy you, meaning to say that the situation will be that no one wants to buy the Jewish people as slaves. Like he says over here, that there'll be that they will purchase you in order to murder you. So here he says, Rabbi Steinsaltz actually, as it says, the repetitive nature of the verse indicates that no one will be willing to buy you for service duty, for slaves and maidservants, but they will purchase you in order to murder you. Because actually, Haman, this is actually the only. I'm not sure whether Rabbi Steinsaltz is saying this on his own or other from a commentary, because Rabbi Steinsaltz is the only one I saw who says it like this, that the curse is that no one's going to buy you for slaves. No one's going to want the Jewish people as slave servants, but there's going to be someone who's going to want to buy the Jewish people for murder. And who's that? Haman. Haman paid a tremendous amount of silver to the treasure of the king in order to be able to kill the Jewish people. That's his whole incentive. He didn't want any service from them. He just wanted to be able to kill the Jewish people. So I just want to stop tonight. His classes and helped by others, but also in honor of Mordechai Yehuda ben Musia, who's going to have a surgery on Thursday. Shigo b'shat tov v'tzlachas. Okay. Hey Judith. So the Reb Steinsaltz says that the no one's going to want to buy the Jewish people for service, but they're going to want to buy the Jewish people for murder, and that's why it's very sad. Says Mashikasa B'Terev Ein Koiner Gazer Haman Shloyi Adam Rashi Liknes Mem Levet. So Rashi says different than what Rabbi Steinsaltz says. Rashi says that the one of Haman's decrees was, I guess, that there would have been protection. Unlike Hitler, Hitler went and he found anyone who's Jewish, mother, son, whatever, any kind of sign of Jewish, he went and he sniffed them out and from all over Europe and murdered them. So Haman, I guess there's some sort of, hey Bruce, Haman had some sort of or 11a towards the middle. So Haman made a decree. Rashi says that no one's allowed to buy a person as a Jewish servant, a Jewish person as a servant, because had he been bought as a servant, I'm assuming what Rashi's saying is, had he been bought as servants, then maybe that would have protected them as a servant of a Gentile, of a citizen of Persia, that maybe would have given the Jew protection. So therefore, he says no one's allowed to buy them as servants. I'm assuming that's what Rashi means. But Rabbi Steinsaltz says on the contrary, that there's that Haman didn't buy them for service. Haman bought them for murder. Haman paid Achashverosh money to own the Jews and do what he wants. And Achashverosh says you can do whatever you want. Okay, so that's how Rav saw the opening of the story of the Megillah. Shmuel Amar Samuel says like this. Again, these are all verses that talks about the unfortunate exile of the Jewish people that's going to come to pass that Moshe Rabbeinu talks about. So it says, So it says, I will not reject them. I will not galtim. Galtim is from being disgusted. L'chaloisem, to destroy them. Um, and when is this happening? When is this? What's this talking about? Eshuki? We're talking about Leima Astim. God is not going to be. Uh, um, uh, um, it could be after we'll check the Megillah. Drew. The truth wants to know if it's 50 kikar. When we get, we'll check that in a second. How much he paid? Whatever it is, he paid. He paid for murder. He paid the Achashverosh to be able to murder the Jews. Haman did, based on Judas' question. How much did Haman pay? So we're holding 11a b 11a in the middle of the page. So Rav says, Leima Astim. When was God not ma'us, disgusted? Or Altim is also a language of reject or disgust. So reject Ma'astim. Okay, I'm not sure how Ma'astim is reject, but okay. When was this? This is the days of the Greeks. In the days of the Greeks in the Second Temple, when in turn the story of Hanukkah, God wasn't disgusted with the Jew, or didn't reject the Jewish people. Like ultimately, he wasn't disgusted or bored with the Jewish people. Is in the days of Nebuchadnezzar, and when didn't he let them be destroyed? Bimei Haman, in the days of Haman. Lahafi brisi itam, and I didn't break my covenant with them. Bimei Parsium, in the days of the Persians. It doesn't say here how the days of the Persians is different than the days of Haman, because once the story of Haman happened, the Persians actually let the Jewish people build the second temple, the son of Achashverosh, Daryavush, the Darius, and then afterwards, they didn't last that much longer than the Greeks came. Alexander Mogdan came and captured Persia. So I'm not sure what's Persia different than Haman. Maybe he means today. I'm Hashem your Lord. B'mei Gog and Magog, in the days of the battles of Mashiach, which is known as the battle of Gog and Magog. God's going to say to the Jewish, God's going to show the world that I'm Hashem, the Lord of the Jewish people. Elokeihem, that's the Lord of the Jewish people, and that's their God, like Rashi says. Shmuel Amr Mihacha Paschalei Ma'astim. That's where Shmuel started. Rashi says, talking about the Megillah, was he spoke about the idea that God made a covenant with the Jewish people, and he didn't reject, wasn't disgusted, didn't allow for destruction, didn't break his covenant, and show that he's the Lord of them, and when in different times. Of the times of the Greeks, others say it wasn't the times of the Greeks, it was the times of the Romans, because obviously the Romans fit to be mentioned in this conversation. Or the days of Nebuchadnezzar, who he was from Babylon, destroyed the temple. L'chaloisim is Haman, and then the days of the Persians, which maybe the days of the Persians is really supposed to be the Romans. You have to remember the Gemara had a lot of sensory. Because of the sensory, we changed names not to offend the powers that may be, that they shouldn't, even the Rambam was censored. But by the way, the idea of Ani Hashem Lekehem, today, anyone who opens up the news and reads about the narrative out there is who says the Jewish people are the chosen people, arguing who they're not really the Jews. So God says in the days of Gog and Magog, in the days of Mashiach, that's going to be the conversation, and I'm going to let it be known that I am Hashem, the Lord of the Jewish people, that the Jewish people are my people. Okay. So Rashi, the Gemara continues. B'masnisa Tana, we learned in a brisa similar. Loima asked him that when was God not rejecting the Jewish people? B'mei kazdim. Kazdim is a reference to the Babylonians. Shemaditi lahem. Why? Because I set up for them peoples to be advocates for the Jewish people, amongst the Jewish people, like Daniel, Hanan, and Mishael, Vazariah. These were court Jews that were able to be involved in what was happening in the courts and not let the countries that may be destroy the Jewish people. Like Altim, when did God not, so to say, be disgusted with the Jewish people? Is in the days of the Greeks, when in the beginning, everyone knows the story. If you go back to the origin of the story of Hanukkah, Shemaditi lahem Shimon Tzadik, that Shimon the righteous, Shimon the just, who approached Alexander Mogdan, Alexander the Great, and to petition on behalf of the Jewish people, because Alexander went to go conquer Jerusalem. he didn't conquer Jerusalem in such a way. He didn't destroy Jerusalem. He conquered it, but not in destruction, not in the way of destruction, because Shimon HaTzadik approached them. So we had these Jews. The Brisa takes a different approach. Shmuel says that God Himself says, "I'm not going to let these people. I'm not going to basically forsake the Jewish people. Not in the days of the Persians, in the Babylonians, in the Greeks." In the days of the Persians, whenever that dates are, and in the days of Gog and Magog. But the Brisa says that on the contrary, that there's kind of going to be what's called inside the Hishtalshlus. The Rebbe speaks about many times that how the Jewish people are protected during Gullus. There's the ways that Jewish people are protected in a way of nature. Like there's a natural way. You have Daniel there. You have Shimon HaTzadik there. These are people that are the buffer to protect the Jewish people from these psychotic monarchs. So Shimon HaTzadik, and also the Gemara, the Brisa mentions Chashmonai Uvayanov, the Chashmonai family and his sons, meaning the Maccabees. They ruled Israel after the story of Hanukkah for over 100 years, and then Matisyahu Kohen Gadol, Matisyahu the high priest. Again, a lot of this is questionable, meaning to say the Chashmonaim were the descendants of Matisyahu. Matisyahu wasn't a separate entity from the Chashmonaim. The Chashmonaim were his family, his descendants. So some want to say that Chashmonaim is talking about from when Shimon the king, Shimon the Maccabee became ruler. That was kind of a different stage. Matisyahu was in the early stages of the rebellion against the Greeks. Okay, God did not allow the Goyim to destroy the Jewish people in the days of Haman. Why? Shamadi to land Mordechai Esther. They had Mordechai Esther there to protect them. So again, we're seeing that the Brisa is going along the line of who were the people that were there to help the Jewish people. We have Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah. We have Shimon the righteous, the just. We have Chashmonaim, the kings of the Chashmonaim, the Matisyahu, and then we have Mordechai and Esther. L'hafer brisi itam b'mei roimanim. I didn't forsake my covenant with them in the days of the Romans. In other versions, it says, I think, the days of the Persians. Why? Who was there in the days of the Romans to kind of be there on behalf of the Jewish people? Shamadi Lahem Shal Beis Rabbi. Because they had the house of Hillel, the Chachmei Adoros, and the scholars of the time. We read in the Gemara many, many times of how the scholars, Rabbi Gamliel, Rabbi Yishmael, Rabbi Akiva, Nachum Ish Gamzu, different Jewish rabbis of the time went to Rome on behalf of the Jewish people. So God always had some, the Jewish people weren't left. Like Bruce belongs to an organization called Stand With Us. It's the same idea. These are organizations that are there for the Jewish people in the Gullus, in the exile, in the diaspora. So the Mishnah says that's way it always was. Ki ani Hashem Aleikei, I'm Hashem their Lord. Lasted Lavi in the end of days. Hold on, Jonathan. In the end of days, she'ein kol umma v'lachin nechayla lishleit bet. The God doesn't say the person who, but then God's going to be there and is not going to allow any nation or language, so to say, tongue, to rule over the Jewish people in the days of Mashiach. Yes, Jonathan.
Why didn't the Persians just try to destroy our spirit, but instead they tried to destroy us physically? They tried to destroy our bodies, they tried to kill us, and then some. Why couldn't they just try to do what the Yavanim did? Okay.
You're asking why they did that? You're asking if they did that. Why? I don't know. That's what they did. That's what they wanted to do.
We had the body more important than ourselves? Why was our bodies more important to them than our souls to them?
There's different punishments. I mean, Hitler was the same thing. Hitler found Jewish people that converted out. Hitler found Jewish people that were intermarried. They weren't even halachically Jewish. He didn't want any. There's different types of enemies of the Jewish people. Some people are enemies of our soul. Some people are enemies of our body. That actually is a sign, by the way. It's a good point because it's a sign to show that the anti-Semite hates the Jewish body as much as he hates the Jewish soul. It's not just the theology and it's not just this Torah that they hate. They hate the existence of the Jewish people as a people. Haman didn't hear anything. Although the Alter Rebbe brings down that had they converted in the times of Haman, that he wouldn't have bothered them. Okay. Daniel. So Reb Steinzalt says, what does it mean that he set up Daniel for them? So he says, I just want to say the Tosfos read as, I just want to add before we see Reb Shmuel says, Tosfos read as, okay, this is I think what he's saying over here. The Gemara apparently is noting individuals in various generations who are not only righteous, but also respected by the Gentile governments, and thereby awarded a certain measure of authority to defend the Jewish people from their enemies. Okay, that's what I was just going to quote from my other source of the Tosfos read that says that these people, like the Mordechai Esther's of the generation, the Moshe Montefiores of the generation, there's different people throughout history that we had in the exile, as he mentioned over here, Shimon HaTzadik, the Chashmonoim, the Haman Mordechai Esther, Beis Rebbe, that were there for Daniel, that were there for the Jewish people to petition on behalf of the Jewish people. There's others, of course, that are not mentioned. Bimei Roimi, so he says in the Hebrew text it reads the Persians, but the English translation, I'm not sure what he means by the English translation versus the Hebrew text, reads the Romans in order to reflect the original version of the text, which was altered by the censor in order to avoid offending the Romans. The Romans were very sensitive. They had no problem murdering the Jewish people, but don't write about it. Right? So if they wanted to murder the Jewish people and destroy the temple, that was okay. But if you put it in your text, then they get upset. I'm not sure the logic there. Okay. Then we have Shimon HaTzadik, Shimon the righteous. So the question is, who is the Shimon HaTzadik? So Reb Sheindat says, just to tell us the history, there were two high priests, the grandfather and the grandson, who were both named Shimon ben Chanya. And it's unclear which one of them is referred to as Shimon HaTzadik. It is possible both of them shared the name Shimon HaTzadik, was one of the members of the Great Assembly, like we learned in Pirkei Avos, and his first individual, and he is the first individual known by name in the chain of transmission of the oral Torah. Shimon HaTzadik starts by name the oral Torah to go into the Mishnah, as is mentioned in the first chapter of Pirkei Avos. Many stories of his righteousness appear throughout the Mishnah, Talmud, through the Mishnah and Talmud. Unique words of praise for him were uttered by his contemporary Shimon ben Sira. Shimon ben Sira was we learned about Ben Sira, who was a kind of he wrote a book, Ben Sira. The rabbis didn't consider it as part of the Torah. He's not that he was anti-Torah, but there were some verses that we learned that they didn't like. Who said that he was the greatest of his brothers and the splendor of his people, who is concerned for his people and strengthened them in times of trouble. How splendid he is as he looks out from the temple, as he emerges from the inner chamber behind the curtain, obviously referring to Yom Kippur, like a star of light between trees, like a full moon during the festival. So in Sefer Ben Sira describes the greatness of Shimon HaTzadik. Again, we know Shimon HaTzadik went to go meet Alexander, and he saved the Jewish people from destruction. So here he says the sources and meaning of the names Chashmonaim is unclear, though the entire dynasty is referred to in the Jewish sources as the House of Chashmonaim. Its origin is unknown. The Gemara here appears to differentiate between the Chashmonaim and Matisyahu, perhaps indicating that Chashmonaim is a nickname for Shimon ben Matisyahu, who was, I think, the third king of the house of Chashmonaim, whose descendants were the Chashmonaim kings for generations. So Shimon became Shimon became the last Shimon became the first king where it started to stay in his family. Before then, it was his brothers, Yehuda the Maccabi, Matisyahu. Okay, so basically, in this Mishnah, this brisa that we just learned is very telling. Who he mentions as the people that were for the Jewish people, who was there for the Jewish people as, so to say, protection. Daniel, Hanani, Mishael, Verzari, he mentions Shimon the righteous, the Chashmonaim separating it from Matisyahu, and of course the house of Esther and the house of Rebbe. But again, this is something that's been going on for generations, where we have people and organizations that have been there, and their job was, and it's important. That's why I mentioned, Bruce, the importance of being involved in organizations like Stand With Us, is because this has been part of our tradition for always, from the beginning, from even before the building of the Second Temple, where there was people there that the mission of the Brisa recognizes, and by name, were there to be there on behalf of the Jewish people. Okay. But again, if you look at the version of Shmuel, different than the version of the Brisa, Shmuel mentions it that's all coming from God, which means kind of outside of the system of nature. Because the truth is the Jewish people are not saved only because we have a person, Yeshlanu Malku, Esther is in the palace. We're going to learn later that one of the problems actually that the Jewish people had in Purim were that they felt safe that Esther was the king's wife. By being the queen, they thought, oh, we're perfect. Now no one's going to bother us, right? If Trump's daughter converts to Judaism, that's it. He's our best friend. But you have to remember that the stories like that happened before. Okay, Reb Levi says, Mihacha. He has another verse he brings. So that it says, but if you will not drive out the inhabitants of the land from before you, then shall come to pass. Means if you're not going to do what you have to do, then your enemies that you initially have compassion for, oh, it's not right. The Torah says we have to destroy the nations. That's not human. That's not politically correct. It's going to come back to bite you. Saul didn't kill Agog, the king of Amalek. His descendant is Haman. It's the way it works. You can't have nearsighted. You have to have a bigger picture. And we're dealing again with these questions today as we speak. All this came to pass because Saul didn't feel the need to eradicate Amalek. He says, "You're going to eradicate Amalek? It's not, let him live. He's powerless. Like we've destroyed him. We sunk all his ships. We've destroyed his airplanes. He can't do anything to us. He did something to us. He almost destroyed the Jewish people. So we've been in this story before over and over and over again. And Levi says it's because you're not doing what you're supposed to do. The Jewish people were told how to deal with our enemies, and you have to deal with it the way the Torah says so." He brings the Marsha. Talks about the Marsha, I think, brings about the pasuk continues with so that they're going to be a tyrant to you. If you don't kill the enemies, they're going to end up being a tyrant to you. Till today, I wake up in the morning, I'm reading that soldiers are terrified in Gaza because they're not allowed to shoot, and they're scared they're going to be kidnapped. Right? So that's again, these are the stories that are happening over and over and over again. Okay, so the Marsha says this doesn't only mean in Eretz Yisrael; it means even outside of Eretz Yisrael. Okay, Reb Chia Amar Mihacher. Reb Chia says the verse is from here. Whatever I thought to do to them, I'm going to do to you. The Jewish people almost were destroyed because of the story of things that we've done that we're going to discuss later in the Gemara of why there was a Exile, why was it the decree of Purim. So it's prior, like Rav Stein says, prior to the miracle of Purim, the Jewish people were subject to punishment that the Torah designated for its enemies because they did not fulfill God's commandments. So he says, Achashverosh. Okay, now we're going to start talking about who is Achashverosh. Again, anyone who studies history from different sources, that's their books. We're studying the Torah, which is the Talmud. Achashverosh, who's Achashverosh? So Rav says, in the name of Achashverosh, you could manipulate the letters to understand Achiv Shel Rosh. He was the brother of someone of a head, uben Giloi Shel Rosh. He was the same type of person as someone who was a head, meaning Achiv Shel Rosh, he was like a brother to Nebuchadnezzar Rasha. Again, the Gemara doesn't have it doesn't mince its words with its attitude towards Achashverosh. Achashverosh, we could analyze the character of Achashverosh, and we can find again similarities in different monarchs or leaders of our history, where things were very tricky. So it says the Gemara is not a big fan of Achashverosh. They don't give him a clean slate. They don't pretend that he was a tzaddik in any way or form. So Achashverosh Amarav Achiv Shel Rosh, he's like a brother of the head, which is in the name Achiv Shel Rosh Achashverosh. Uben Giloi Shel Rosh, and he's like, so to say, the age of the head. Achiv Shel Rosh, what does it mean? He's the brother of the head. Achiv Shel Nebuchadnezzar Rosh, he's like a brother to Nebuchadnezzar, the wicked who destroyed the temple, the first temple. Shenikra Rosh, how do we know that Nebuchadnezzar was called the head? Because like it says in the dream of the translation of the dream of Daniel, Anti Reisha di Dahava. That Daniel said to Nebuchadnezzar, "You're the head of the statue, the golden head," and that was a reference to Achashverosh. So Nebuchadnezzar. So when Nebuchadnezzar sees the whole image of the history in the statue, and throughout the body of the statue, we see different changes of character and materials representing different monarchs and kings of history up until our times, right? The fingernails, it mentions Yishmael, the Ishmaelites, which is basically what we're dealing with now. So it says that it starts with Ate Reisha Dahava, you're the golden head. Ben Giloi Shal Roish, what does it mean in the days or the kind of the mazel of another Roish? Who harag who bikish laroi. Just like Nebuchadnezzar killed the Jews, Achashverosh looked to kill the Jews. Who hechriv, he destroyed the Beis Hamikdash. Nebuchadnezzar, who bikish lachriv, he wanted to destroy the Beis Hamikdash. How do we know? Because Shnemer Machus Achashverosh betchilas Machusay kasvu sitin al Yesh v'Yehudi v'Yerushalayim. When they wrote a sitna is when they wrote accusations against the inhabitants of Yehud. You have to remember just a little history note. The nothing's changed, and we look at when you're in deep into it. So you only see things from your perspective, from where your eyesight only could see from the distance from the situation where you're standing. But in the history of things, if you get it from a bigger picture, a lot of things are repetitive. Then the Jewish people came back, wanted to build a second temple after the destruction of the first temple. It didn't happen right away. There was two aliyot, or a few aliyot, with two main elevations that the Jewish people came back to the Holy Land. The first one was with in the days of Koresh, with Zerubbabel. Zerubbabel was a descendant of the house of David. So he kind of it was like the Davidic dynasty being revived with Zerubbabel, who was either the grandson or the great-grandson of Yechaniah, one of the last kings of Yehuda. It was kind of the house of David who was going back to Eretz Yisrael, but they weren't successful. They weren't able to build a temple. There was a lot of decrees against them, and Achashverosh wanted to destroy that. Only later, after the story of Purim, and Esther's son, according to most people, is Daryavish Darius, allowed Ezra and Nehemiah, and then it was under another kind of system. It was under the Persians with another kind of with other rules. It was not anymore Davidic dynasty. That never was revived. But in the beginning, there was a thought of the Davidic dynasty, and even in the prophets, there's a reference to Zerubbabel calling him Tzemach, and Tzemach is a name of Mashiach. So who knows? Maybe there was an idea of Mashiach there, but it didn't come to fruition, didn't come out. At the end, Ezra and Nehemiah kind of started the second temple, and that from there led to the days of Shimon Tzaddik and the Greeks and the Achashverosh, and then to Herod, and then the destruction of the second temple. So it says, and also he just like, so the Gemara again, Rav is saying there's nothing great about Achashverosh. He was just as bad as as Nebuchadnezzar. If everything Nebuchadnezzar did, he wanted to do. He just didn't do it because there was always things that got in the way of his agenda. What does it mean, a brother? He's similar to him. He's no different than Nebuchadnezzar. Ben Giloi, Ben Mazloi, Shneim das Echad Hayilhem. What's Ben Mazloi mean? They had the same mindset. Bikash lahachriv, Rashi says, Yisoid sheyasid Zerubbabel. Again, Zerubbabel was from the family of David, from the Davidic family, a direct descendant of Yechaniah, the last king. So it wasn't just that went back to Jerusalem to build the temple. And he built the foundations of the temple. Bimei Koresh, in days of Koresh, and Lifnei Achashverosh, who was the king before Achashverosh. K'mo she'amar b'Sefer Ezra, as Ezra describes. Koresh was Cyrus. So Cyrus and Daryavish was the Rises. So Cyrus is when they went back to build with Zerubbabel. Again, you have to remember something else, that because the Davidic dynasty was taken into captivity twice, two kings ended up going to Bavel. I mean, for long term, Menashe also went. We're talking about long term, that died basically in Bavel. Tzidkiyahu was pretty much killed by Nebuchadnezzar. I mean, he died in prison, but he was molested, and also he ended up dying of his wounds. And Yechaniah died in Bavel. Yechaniah actually later was taken out of prison and given respect, and his descendant was Zerubbabel. But later, for the next 1,000 years or so, more, the family of David ruled Bavel. The one of the criterias of the Reish Galuta which was the person in charge, and that was a government recognized position, the Reish Galuta. It says, like Reb Steinzal says, the Reish Galuta had a power to put people to death. He was like the third most important person in the Persian Empire. Was had to be from the house of David. So there was the Davidic, and Rebbe is from the house, and the house of Rebbe is also connected to the house of David HaMelech. We're not sure if it's son after son or from the mother's side. The question is who Hillel came from. Hillel the first, which started the base Hillel, but the house of Hillel were definitely from the family of David. So the family of David, that's what Yaakov said to Yehuda when he blesses him, that your family is going to rule the Jewish people in exile and in temple times. But as a monarch, as a king, which Zerubbabel maybe kind of tried to get to that level, that never happened again. But they were either the Nesiim in Eretz Yisrael, in the house of Hillel, but definitely the Rosh Galuta were the descendants of David, of Yechaniah. So Sitna Shenimna l'Satanam shlayivnu. The Satan came and stopped Zerubbabel's plan and didn't let them build a second temple. And it was put on pause. Achashverosh wanted to even uproot the foundations of the temple. There's a lot of Mefarshim that say that when Esther comes in to ask Achashverosh for pleading, so he says to Esther, "I will give you up to half my kingdom." Why does he say half of my kingdom? So seemingly that's just an exaggeration, or that's only just being a generous offer. Obviously, he wouldn't give him his full kingdom, her the full kingdom. He's ready to go 50-50. But others say half means up to Yerushalayim. He wasn't going to give her Jerusalem, even though he didn't know officially that she was Jewish, or at least definitely not the daughter, the wife / niece of Mordechai. Okay, so he said, Shmuel continues. Amar also says, what's the name Achashverosh? In the name of Achashverosh is the word Shverosh. There's also the idea of Shahush Charu Pnem Shal Yisrael B'mei B'yamav Kishule Kedera. It came darkened, like the bottom of a pot becomes darkened by a fire, so too the Jewish people were darkened in the days of Achashverosh. Things turned bad. Again, this cycle that's happened in our history, pretty much from the destruction of the first temple. I'm not sure if it goes back before that, but definitely from the destruction of the first temple, where Jewish people had tremendous confidence in diaspora, thinking everything is great, and then things take a turn, has happened over and over and over and over again in our history. It's happened in the times of Achashverosh. It happened in the times of Spain. It happened different times in Rome. It happened surely in the times of someone, Reb Shimon, who comes to our classes, was telling me that before the uprising of the Cossacks, it was like that in Poland. And God forbid, we see there's definitely the desires for the enemies of the Jewish people today to make that a reality. God forbid, of course, God's not going to allow that to happen. But there's the Hamans of our times today want to do the same thing now. V'Shmuel Amar, Shmuel says, Rabbi Yochanan says, Kol shezoichra, whoever remembers Achashverosh, what do they remember about him? Ach l'raishai. Ach is like he's a pain in the head. He's a headache. Achashverosh was a headache. Rabbi Yochanan says. Rabbi Chanina says, Shakol nasim rashim b'yamav. He took all the money. He caused tariffs and taxes, right? What is one of the last verses of the Megillah? That Achashverosh puts taxes everywhere. On Iyayam, he puts taxes everywhere. So everyone, he took all the money. He was draining all the resources. He put a big tax. The Gemara tells us, the Gemara is going to teach us, and the Mefarshim talk about it more in between the lines, that a lot of what Mordechai and Esther wanted to tell us about the story of Esther, they couldn't put it in writing. We have to assume Achashverosh edited the Megillah, right? He must have read through the Megillah in one of his free times. His wife was the author, right? You'd assume that he read the Megillah. So they had to be very careful what they put into the Megillah. No one accused Achashverosh of being a genius, but he wasn't a total idiot. So they had to be very careful of what they put into the Megillah. So they cryptically they hinted a lot of things about Achashverosh in what they didn't say more than what they did say. Shakol Nasim Rashim B'Yamav, Reb Steinzal says everyone became poor in his days. Achashverosh collected an inordinate amount of taxes to finance his wars and to meet the expenses of his vast building projects, as mentioned by the Greek historians of that period. So it wasn't just the Megillah. Everyone acknowledged that Achashverosh was, paying for the wall. Okay. Who Achashverosh? The Gemara says, this is the same Achashverosh. Nothing's changed. Again, the Gemara doesn't like Achashverosh. The Gemara, we appreciate what Achashverosh has done. Bottom line is, at the end of the day, is because of him the story of Haman started, but it's also because of him the story of Haman stopped. So we have to also give him a little credit. And at the same time, at the end of the day, the Jewish people went back to Eretz Yisrael after the story of Haman. But Achashverosh, it wasn't because he was a great guy. So the Gemara says he's the same wicked person from the beginning of the end. He never changed. Means essentially he never changed. The difference, like we said last week, is that the essential difference between Achashverosh and Haman was that Haman was just a hater. He was ready to pay money. Or Judith mentioned the 500 blocks of silver for just to murder the Jewish people, even if it would be negative for the crown. Right? A lot of times when Hitler became obsessive with trying to murder the Jewish people, he spent the resources he should have spent on the war. It wasn't in the interest of Spain to expel the Jews. The Jews were a benefit to the economy. But when you get crazy with your anti-Semitism, so that's what you want. Achashverosh wasn't that crazy. Achashverosh always thought about the bottom line. Where's the money? He followed the money. He followed the stock market. So when it worked for him, so he was okay to hurt the Jewish people. When it didn't work for him, he says, okay, sorry, the economy comes first. So who Achashverosh berishim t'chilas v'atsefer, but don't make a mistake. He's the same evil Achashverosh from the beginning to the end. Like it says who Esav. Esav was the same Esav, notwithstanding of any kind of sign that shows that he was pleasant to Yaakov when he kind of backs down. He's the same Esav from the beginning to the end. Who Dasan Varviram? Now the Gemara mentions even Jewish wicked people. Unfortunately, there could be some of our own. Hein Birishon, they're the same wicked people. Mitchilas and Vatsofa. Dasan Varviram were never good people. Who Melech Achaz, the king of Yehuda. Achaz, I'm not sure why we mentioned him, but he was the wicked king. Birishai Mitchila Vatsofa. There was never a good part of Achaz as a king of the Jewish people. So Rav Steinzal says, the commentaries note that the Gemara emphasizes that the word who appears in reference to all those wicked individuals to indicate that although there is reason to believe that they changed their ways and improved their character, in truth they remained who they were. It's just that the circumstances changed. It was no longer popular or in their interest to be the same haters that Korach he does not mention. Korach is a different league. I don't want to. Some people you have to be careful. Korach is considered a Rashi. You're not allowed to mention. You're not allowed to name your child Korach. You can't read Shem Shayim Yirkov. But at the same time, there's Korach was at least there was some sort of angle there. But or not. But either way. So he says, but they were wicked from here. He says even if they changed, the agenda changed, the narrative changed, but they didn't change. For instance, although Achashverosh ultimately protected the Jews. At the end, he protected the Jews. In truth, he essentially remained Achashverosh the wicked. That's what the Gemara says. Similar to King Achaz, who was in danger and witnessed miracles, he did not change. Nevertheless, he didn't change. In similar vein, the word who, used in reference to the righteous individuals, such as Avram, Moshe, and David, indicate that they were righteous from the beginning to end, as their greatness did not lead them to arrogance. So the Mashal says that there's certain people, they are who they are. For good or for bad. In the bad, we just gave a list of people. Now we're going to name the good people that stayed positive. Avram. Avram never changed. He was righteous from the beginning to the end. Who Aaron and Moshe? It says Moshe and Aaron. And they stayed righteous from the beginning to the end. Now, about David, it says an amazing thing. What does it say about King David? David who akatan. It says David was the youngest. He was small. Katan also means small. Small indicating he was humble. David never became egotistic. He never let the monarch get to his head. The same humbleness he had in his early beginnings is the same humbleness he had at the end. Just like when he was younger, he was small. He respected those who were the giants of Torah greater than him. Even when he was king, if someone was wiser than him, he wasn't scared, he wasn't uncomfortable to acknowledge that. Avram, Pasuk B'divrei Yom. I was actually wondering, when I was preparing the class, I don't remember such a Pasuk. Avram. So Rashi also says, Rashi figured that not everyone's going to be familiar with that pasuk because not everyone's familiar with Divrei Yom. He says it's a pasuk in Divrei Yom. It doesn't tell us which pasuk, but he says it's a pasuk in Divrei Yom. I just want to bring down over here. He says, the Gra says just the idea of Hu Achashverosh, that there was two Achashveroshes. So they want to say this is the Achashverosh that ruled from Hodu to Kush. His father, his grandfather that was Achashverosh was the father of Darius. Okay, we're not sure if Achashverosh was a family of the king. We're going to see that. We're going to see that in a second. If he was from the family of the king or not, but he was this. There was the father of Darius, who was also Achashverosh. So the Gemara says the reason why it says Vahi b'mei Achashverosh, hu Achashverosh. You have to know which Achashverosh we're talking about. We're talking about the Achashverosh of our story, which is the one that ruled from Hodu to Kush. The Maharal says that a person may observe, may watch the story of Purim and say, "Look, what do you mean Achashverosh was wicked? He destroyed Haman. He killed him. He hung him off a tree. He hung his 10 children off trees. He made Mordechai and Esther the head of his house. He became a great guy." So the Maharal says, no. This that he put Mordechai in charge of all the greatness that Haman had initially. It's not because he became a better person. He was the same evil. What's evil means? In this case, evil also means he was just selfish. It was all about him. The same person. He didn't become all of a sudden a giving, kind, caring person. It was all for his benefit. Mordechai was the person of the moment. He saw the miracle. And therefore he went with Mordechai. He goes wherever the trend is going. Others say that it was his obsession with Esther. Hu Achashverosh is that everything he did for the Jewish people was only because of his love for Esther, not because of his love for the Jewish people. It makes him not such a bad guy. Chassam Sofer writes that that the reason why he writes at the end of the Megillah that if you want to know more about Achashverosh, read the diaries, the books of Persia, and that is because anything about Achashverosh that has to do with the Jewish people is miraculous. But anything about Achashverosh, about his own accomplishments, that we're not going to tell about. But again, he couldn't write these things straight in the Megillah, so he hinted it. Okay, we have 20 minutes. Let's go further. Okay, Hamoilech. It says about Achashverosh that he was the ruler. So the Gemara stops right there. What do you mean he was the king? What do you mean Hamoilech? Seemingly the verse is right. You open up Esther. It doesn't seem like it's so complicated. What's the Gemara getting worked up about? But the Gemara does get worked up. The Gemara says, this is the first verse, right? Chapter 1, verse 1. It came to pass in the days of Achashverosh. Who Achashverosh? That's like say like the Gra. So the Gemara says who Achashverosh is. He was the same evil guy. He never changed. But what the Gra says, you want to know which king he is? The one, Hamoilech, who was king from Hodu to Kush. And he ruled over 127 nations. Okay? And then when happened, in those days, when he became established as king, then he made a big party in the third year of his rule. He made a big party in Shushan. So that's the first opening 3 verses of the Megillah. But the Megillah, the Gemara doesn't accept it that way. It analyzes every word. So the Gemara says, Hamoilech, what do you mean he was king? Who made him king? How did he become king? Amar Rav. So Rav challenges immediately. Shemalech mi'atzmeh. He made himself king. Some people say that as a compliment, and some people say that as not such a compliment, as a disgrace. Those who say it as a credit or a compliment, no one was worthy of being king like him. It's always the political question: is he the best guy for the job? Others say it as a disgrace. He never should have been king. He wasn't worthy of it. He used his money to buy the position. Right? Nothing has changed. It's always the same questions of what makes a person a monarch. So we don't even know. Even today, after the story is told, Rav says some see it from this perspective, some see it from that perspective. Because no one's arguing the facts that he was a wealthy guy. And Vashti didn't respect him. She said he was my grandfather's, the person who watched my grandfather's horses. But the question is, how do you look at it when you see someone climb the social ladder using being a self-made person, man or woman, and using their money? Maybe that's a compliment, or maybe it's not. Or maybe that person doesn't belong. Maybe royalty is something that you should be born into. It means that it's not that we're arguing facts. We're arguing to understand this is an open debate. How do we look at a person who's worthy to be a ruler? What qualifications do you have to have? There's some people look at it to say, on the contrary, the very fact that the person was able to make something of themselves, even though they have humble beginnings, maybe that's a sign that he should be or she should be the ruler. Others say, no, rule is something that should be in your blood because it's bigger than just making a few good business deals. So Rashi says, Rashi says, again, this is questionable because Steinzel says we don't know who we're talking about in history. But Rashi says he wasn't from a descendant of kings. Others say that he was a descendant of kings. He just wasn't the one he wasn't the chosen one. He wasn't the one that should have gotten the job because he wasn't the one next in line. He muscles himself into the position from amongst his brothers. So Reb Steinsaltz, of course, addresses the question. He says, if Achashverosh is indeed the king referred to as Exarius the first, then the Gemara intention would seem to be that although he was not the eldest of Darius' sons, he was nevertheless appointed king in place of his older brother because maybe he was more successful financially than them. He wasn't a shlemazel. So he was a chevraman. But again, Vashti, clearly from Vashti, we see that Vashti did not think of him anything great. I'll bring them some other commentaries. The Medrash Shmuel says, it says, there's a pasuk that says, that's what Shlomo Melech says. The Medrash Shmuel says like this, that in this debate about what makes a person worthy to be a monarch, someone who's a self-made person or a person who's been born into it, he says there's a concept of that the melucha that a person who's born into it has a certain better sense of what it means to rule. Because there's a certain, I'm going to say this, I don't mean it to be insensitive to anyone, but there's a certain selfishness and ego trip when a person's personally trying to climb the social ladder, as opposed to a person who's born into it, if they're a good person, and see it as a responsibility as opposed to an achievement. A person who's born as a king and comes with the right character looks as the job of being king as a responsibility. A person who's not socially meant to be king, doesn't come from the family of kings, looks at it as an achievement. I'm going to get something, what else could I buy? I can't buy, I have enough money, I have all the planes and watches and cars that I have. Maybe what else could I buy? I could become president. So you're looking at it as another achievement of something you could achieve. It's personal. Whereas a person who's born in it maybe will look at it as from a place of responsibility and be a more melech b'mishpat, to have more judgment and be more yosher. That's what the Medrash Shmuel says. So again, and that's what he says. He quotes a pasuk from Shlomo Melech to support that melech b'mishpat yamid aretz v'ish tzurumasa yaharsena. That if a person is born into royalty, so Yamid Aretz, the person looks at it as a responsibility. But if each trumos, if you're a person who's giving donations, meaning you're trying to buy it, then Yaharsana, it's all personal. It means at the end of the day is a person who's been motivated their whole life about self-achievement, able to transition to be a person of caring, to see beyond themselves. And that's what the debate is. That was Achashverosh able to see beyond himself? It seems like the Gemara is leaning to the fact that he couldn't. And at the end of the day, he was always number one. It was always about him. So when Haman was involved, then he was okay with killing the Jews. But as soon as that narrative wasn't working for him anymore, he had no problem switching sides because it was always about him. He was always number uno. So that's why it's a debate about who's better to be appointed as king. I just want to continue. He says over here, that's why also it's brought down later that Vashti would belittle him. She never let him forget his humble beginnings. She said, you're the person who took care of my father's horses. Okay, there's other questions about who he really was, if he was the grandson of Daryavish, or if some people say, there's one opinion that says that he was actually a bastard, that his brother had a relation with his mother, and therefore he wasn't really the son of a king because he was born out of wedlock, and his father wasn't the king, but he was from the family of the king because of how things worked out, and that wasn't also uncommon in those days. Okay, so therefore we don't know exactly who he was either way. The Gemara continues. He ruled from Hodu to Kush. What's Hodu Kush? Traditionally, Hodu and Kush today, if you wanted, based on modern translation, Hodu is India, and Kush is a country in Africa. So Africa and India are not really so far from each other. There's the continent of there's where India is and there's where Africa is, right? The Indian and the Atlantic Sea meet over there. So it's not so far, but it depends of which direction you're going. They could be very close to each other. First of all, the Gemara always says there could be two Hodus and two Kushes. That makes everything very difficult. What Hodu and Kush are we talking about? But even if you're going to say that it's Africa and India, first of all, Africa and India, pretty much that was civilized area. So we're not counting the Americas, although we're missing out all of Asia, which obviously was inhabited at the time. But others could say that it went the other way around the globe, and therefore it kind of took the whole globe in between. Rav Shmuel, but there's a discussion. Khan Omar, Hodu b'sof olam, v'kush b'sof olam, the two very far cities from each countries from each other. V'chad Omar, Hodu v'kush gabi hadadi havi kamim. They were very close to each other. So the idea is no one's arguing how great he was because the Megillah says he had 127 countries. Just like he was able to rule over two countries next to each other, he was able to rule the whole world. We're going to learn soon that Achashverosh is one on a short list that the Gemara mentions of a Moshel B'Kippah, someone who ruled all of civilized world. Again, ruling over civilized world doesn't mean that he had, that it was everyone was a Persian citizen, but it means that he ruled. Especially Achashverosh, was very much into leaving every country, like it says, Kichsavam Shainam. He kept people, Sancheiriv before him, redirected everyone, and therefore everyone became. No one had an identity. He stripped everyone of their personal nationalistic identity. Achashverosh says, no, you're in Hodu, stay in Hodu. You're in Kush, stay in Kush. You want to read Arabic, you want to read English, Mandarin, that's Spanish, that's fine. Pay taxes. Yes, Paula.
Oh, it's not. It's
Yeah.
the one question I have. He ruled over the entire earth. You said. So how many of those countries did he actually visit? And how many of those countries, if he didn't visit them, did he get the taxes?
No, it's fascinating actually, because in the story of Esther, if you just read the text of the Megillah, every time he made a decree and broke the decree, right? Haman made a decree, and then Mordechai sent the second decree, the second papers. It says that they had runners. They had speed people that moved. They're able to move evidently to all over his countries in a very short amount of time. Speed runners. They had a method of getting information and documents. So it seems like he personally possibly didn't. I mean, we just said before, that he had all these wars and everything, and therefore he taxed the people for the war. Again, these are the same questions today that America's having it going to elections today, right? Should we be spending all this money on wars? And maybe we don't want to vote Republican. These are the same questions of Achashverosh. He had these wars he wanted to conquer, and it was at the expense of the people, and that was a question if they wanted to do it or not. But he kept on taxing the people. But if he personally went there, we don't know. But he definitely had his legions. I mean, the Romans also went everywhere. But he had his runners, and he was able to. He didn't turn. Like Rome kind of wanted to make everyone Rome. The Greeks kind of made everyone Greek. Achashverosh was happy. Be who you are. But you're mine. I don't care. I mean, there's a kind of arrogance. There's this kind of from again. It's a debate. You could look at it as a kindness. You could look at it as a super arrogance. England, right? What did England do? They went to India and they made the Indians play cricket. Why would an Indian play cricket? Because they wanted to make the world English. Everyone had to behave like English. Everyone had to start, drinking tea at 2:00. That's how they used their rule. Achashverosh says no. Achashverosh says, do what you do, talk your talk, eat your foods, keep your identity, but you're mine. Kill the Jews. If I say kill the Jews, kill the Jews. If I say don't kill the Jews, don't kill the Jews. That's a super level of arrogance. That means he doesn't need to break them in order to rule them. And if you look at it from that perspective, another similar idea is we find that it says about Shlomo Melech, I believe it is, that Yehu roide b'chol ever anar mitifsach chvad Aza. He ruled from Tifsach to Aza. Rav Shmuel Chadam or Tifsach b'saf olam v'Aza b'saf olam. As we're going to see later, that Shlomo was also a ruler over the whole world. And again, he also collected benefits and gifts from all over the world, and everyone came to him for knowledge and advice. But again, are these two cities next to each other? They were next to each other. The question is, do you look at it from the distance? You look from the closeness. Looking from the closeness, again, a lot of other people say that Hod and Kush, that those days, because they traveled by sail, and sail needs to have wind, you couldn't travel from what's today Africa to India the quick way. You had to travel the long way because that's how the wind blew. That's what some say. Again, I'm not a sailor. I don't know. I have no problem subscribing to that. Okay, so Rashi says, "Ki roide ksiv b'shlomo, kishem shemach tiftach va'aza v'achkam ki roide b'chol aver hanar kamay misivtach va'aza." Just he ruled over the whole area of the river, just like he ruled over the cities that were next to each other of Tifsach and Aza. Now, the Gemara continues to analyze Achashverosh. He was a ruler over 127 nations. How does the Megillah tell us that? Sheva ve'esrim u'meya. First, we have right. We have that similar to Sarah, our foremother, our mother, right? Sarah, she also had 127 years, and the Rashi right away tells us that we divided all to teach us something. So also by Achashverosh, the 7, the 20, and the 100 coming to teach us something. In the beginning, he was only a ruler over 7 lands. And then he acquired a total of 20, so 27. And then then he acquired another 100. So he was multiplying at a huge amount, a huge multiple, because he went from 7 to 20 and 20 to 100. He keeps on growing faster and faster. If you want to analyze the years, why would you not analyze the years? We'll get back why we ask many people. The Torah tells us their age, but Amram, the Amram, we learned later that Amram was never changed. He was always the same person, always the same righteous person. Amram is the father of Moshe. So it also says about him that he lived Sheva U'Shloishim Ma'ashana 137 years. Mad Darash Debe, why are you making a drasha? So Shani Hacha the Kra Yiseru Michte Chsiv Mehoid Kush. Because over here by Amram, we don't have to say it's coming to teach us anything. We're just telling us how old he was. But the very fact that the Megillah itself tells us that he ruled from Hodu to Kush, why does it have to enumerate how many nations that is? We know he was a king over a large space. Although you could say that it gave us the exact number. So Shev Esir Me'adina Lamali Shmamina Lidrasha to teach us that what? That he was 7, then he was 20, then he was 100. It shows the power of his rule. Okay, we're just going to finish over here and then we're going to stop. It says, what did I see? Oh, the Gra teaches us, just as in the logistics of it, he says that the 100 nations was dry land, meaning not islands. 127 were the islands. So he had 127 islands, Hayam, which is also mentioned in the Megillah that he sent taxes all the way to the island areas. What that means, I don't know if that means the islands in Greece or bigger islands, or even England. The mas is, he says, so actually very cleverly, the Gra says the word mas is made up of the letters mem samach, which is 40 and 60, so that's 100. That shows us the 100 dry lands. That's aretz, and hayam, that's the 100. That's what's remaining, which is the 127 islands. Again, what is considered an island? It could be Cyprus, it could be Malta, it could be there's areas that he could have been, that could have England, etc. Let's just finish off one last. Rabbi Steinsaltz here, he says, although when enumerating the years of other individuals, the Gemara in the Gemara, the division of years into separate phases could indicate changes that they underwent during different periods of their lives. The Gemara in Shabbos 55b teaches that Amram was completely righteous throughout his lifetime. Therefore, the Gemara proves from the fact that the years of Amram's life were divided in that manner that a phase rendering of one's age is not necessarily indicative of a change of course in life. But the fact that the Gemara tells us that he had 127, that he had Hodu to Kush, means to say that it's coming to teach us something. And what is it coming to teach us? It's coming to teach us that how he grew. Means, again, it's a sign of his power. that he went from 7 to 127 nations in a relatively short period of time. Right, next week we'll start with the continuation of the Gemara on the bottom of the page I thought we would get further again today. I went a little slow on about the different people who ruled the world. It says we have Achav, Achashverosh, and Nebuchadnezzar, and the question is, of course, why don't others make that list? Laila Tov, everyone. Thank you for joining.